Hello again, everybody. Episode 24 of Coco and Dalts. For another week, another edition here. I'm not Coco.
And I'm not Dalts.
And so what we're talking about this time around, Coco, sequels. Because, you can't get enough of them. Sequels are one of those things that are rare in Hollywood. People are unwilling to commit to them because they are uncertain.
That's right.
So as we were watching Goon 2 the other day...
Goon 2, The Last of the Enforcers, I believe is its full title.
And let's just talk to the listeners and tell them who wanted to watch that movie.
That was me. I fully admit to that. We didn't even know there was a Goon 2. We watched the first Goon.
We didn't know, actually.
A few months ago, and I enjoyed it. And then we found Goon 2 on Netflix, so we put it on the watch list. And the other night, we were trying to figure out what to watch, and the choice was Goon 2 or, Lincoln. And Goon 2 won out because it was a full hour shorter. Right. So I just arbitrarily made that decision to... No, unilaterally. That's the word I'm looking for. I unilaterally made the decision of Goon 2 over Lincoln.
And it was purely based on the amount of time that we had before we were going to go to bed.
That's exactly right. So I did not enjoy Goon 2 as much as the original Goon, although it did still have some solid laughs, and I know that you really enjoyed Liev Schreiber's performance.
I have a man crush on Liev Schreiber in the Goon series because he is a hockey player. Now, he was raised in New York, and I don't know anything about his background in terms of whether he played hockey as a wee lad.
A wee cheeky shite? Is that what the Outlaw King said?
Right. I don't know anything about his backstory in that regard, but he looks like he can skate, and he looks like a hockey player. He's got that build. Liev Schreiber's a big guy. He's got that upper body strength and everything like that. I believe him as a hockey player.
It says he's actually born in San Francisco.
Oh, okay. I thought he was raised in New York, though, so maybe I'm smoking the pipe. But either way, I believe him as a hockey player. And as we were watching Goon 2, and we were saying, this pales in comparison to the original classic, Goon. Was there anything else to Goon? It was just Goon, right?
I think it was just called Goon.
Goon.
Yeah.
Of course, for those people who want to know, Goon is a story about a man who can't play hockey, but he can fight. So therefore, he's a very good hockey player for a minor league team.
William Scott of American Pie fame. He was a Stifler. He's the
forever known
as Stifler.
A
movie that came out in 98.
Right.
It's going to follow
second role that he was in.
Right?
He's always going to be the pie maker lover. No, that was
that
the
was
other guy.
Chris Klein.
Yeah,
no,
right.
that wasn't Chris Klein. That was Jason Biggs.
Right. Jason Biggs is the pie maker lover.
Yeah.
But he was in the movie where there was pie made love too.
Yes.
So, and he was Stifler. So anyway...
We don't have show notes, just so you know, for this episode. We're flying by the seat of our pants.
This will shock our loyal listeners.
Our single Swedish drunken listener.
Who doesn't know what Black Friday is because he's in Sweden.
Right.
All the power to you. So, as we were watching this sequel, we were feeling a little bit let down because it didn't measure up to the original,
right.
We were thinking, well, now come on. Let's give Jay Baruchel and everybody else involved with the Goon franchise a little bit of credit because it's hard to make a second movie as good as the first. So then we got thinking, and then we had a little bit of debate going on while the movie was playing, I think, because we needed a little bit of extra entertainment. What is a good sequel, and where did we land on that, Coco?
So the Godfather Part 2.
Yes.
Clearly.
Which we had just recently watched.
Yes, because somehow you had managed not to see it ever before, correct?
That is correct. I had seen it in bits and pieces, but never from start to finish.
Yeah, so clearly one of the best sequels of all time. It won the Best Picture Oscar. One of, I believe, only 2 sequels ever to win a Best Picture Oscar.
What was the other one?
The third Lord of the Rings movie.
That doesn't count.
I'm just telling you what
I know.
It was.
I'm not blaming you.
And also, The Empire Strikes Back
Was a good sequel.
Yeah, it was a good sequel.
It was a good sequel, and
Some would say better than the original for both of those movies, actually.
It was pretty good. It was pretty good, and I think the production values had gone up a little bit. So when you look at the original 1977 Star Wars-y movie, and then Empire Strikes Back, and then all the things that had gone on in between, like Star Wars was a huge thing, and George Lucas was an amazing genius and all that sort of stuff, and then he actually had a lot of money to make Empire Strikes Back with. You can tell. And you can tell with the plot line is a little bit more developed, and there's a little bit more going on with the special effects, a little more believable and stuff like that. And then he just totally lost it in the third movie where the Ewoks come dancing on and
with the Care Bears.
With the Care Bears.
Yeah. No, they were Ewoks. I saw a whole thing on YouTube about how to tell the production values in the original Star Wars versus Return of the Jedi, and how in the original Star Wars, like, Darth Vader's helmet is like all dirty and scuffed, but in Empire Strikes Back, it's shiny. And so that was how they signaled that he's more menacing, and something about like the sets,
the lighting, probably,
the lighting and stuff. Like, it was really interesting. Like,
well, I remember the original. I saw the original in the theater. That's how old I am. You were 1 year old.
I was a year old
when original Star Wars came out. I remember when the Land Cruiser speeder is going along, and in the original you could see it bumping, and you could see like the background kind of shaking a little bit. But in those days that was the way it was done, right? That was a special effect.
Right.
And then when they remade the Star Wars and they put a bunch of CGI on top of it, it kind of, in my mind, lost a little bit of it. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about sequels.
That's all right. I love the first Godfather movie. I would give that an A+. Godfather Part 2 is still spectacular, but I would give it like an A minus. Like, I still really, really, really enjoyed it. I didn't like it as much as the first movie, but there wasn't, like I said, it was the difference of like an A+ to an A. Like, it was a very significant drop off for me between the first and the second.
So I would say, here's what I would say. I would go out on a limb and say Godfather 2 is a better movie than The Godfather because of what you just said. Because it's not quite as good, but it's still a really good movie on its own.
Right.
So it's hard when you know the characters, you know all their background, you know what happened in a previous movie, you actually saw it, let's say. It's a little bit harder to be surprised. It's a little bit harder to have tension and that sort of thing when you know what the characters have done and all that sort of stuff. If everything's familiar, whereas if it's unknown and you don't know what's going to happen next, as in an original movie, then I think it's easier to engage the viewers. But with a sequel, you know who the people are, you know what they've done. It's kind of like, well, yeah, let's see the same movie over again in a different situation.
Right, like with Goon 2.
Right.
Right.
I mean, it was very similar with Goon 2. The first movie, he's trying to prove himself because he's an unknown. He comes back. He gets the tar beat out of him by the new guy, who happens to be Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn's son, Wyatt Russell, who I thought was fantastic.
Yeah. We're kind of dogging on Goon 2 a little bit, but between Liev Schreiber and Wyatt Russell, there were actually some pretty good performances in the movie, for it being the kind of movie it was. It's not trying to be The Godfather Part 2.
Right, nor is it trying to be Slapshot. Because Slapshot is a brilliant hockey movie, and there's not going to be anything that tops it. Now, talk about sequels. Slapshot 2 was awful.
I never saw Slapshot 2.
And so this goes in another direction with sequels, is that when there's a certain movie made and there is a climax and a denouement at the end.
Wow, look at you busting out the French, Canadian boy.
And you have a nice tidy bow at the end of the movie. Do we really need another movie after that? Like, that's the thing with a lot of these sequels that, like, when we were doing some research, I had the crack staff, diving into these particular movies for us. There was a sequel to the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah, why?
So now, why? There's no need for that.
Back to the woods. Like, okay.
Well, and it was like with not the shaky camera. And like, I remember when Blair Witch came out and everybody was like, this really happened. People were in the woods and this was so scary.
Yeah,
and then we found out that it wasn't. But it was still a scary movie. There's no need for a sequel to that. And there was also a sequel to the other one.
You'll have to be more specific than that.
The one with the woman whose head spins around.
Oh, The Exorcist.
There was an Exorcist sequel.
Yeah.
And did there really need to be an Exorcist sequel?
Right.
Jaws 2.
Yeah, Jaws 2. Jaws 2, I is by far the best of all the Jaws sequels, which isn't really saying a whole lot, but it was still an entertaining movie. But how many times is a shark going to terrorize Amity Island?
Well, and so like the famous meme on Facebook is like the mayor right. is still the mayor, and the second one is like, how does he still have a job? Well, this is what happens when you don't vote.
Exactly. That was a good meme.
So there's a lot of, in some ways there has been a little bit of discipline and holding back in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. So one of the sequels that I'm glad they didn't make was a sequel to E.T.
Oh yeah,
that made $1 zillion. Was a huge hit at the time, and there was definitely a rhythm there. Like Raiders of the Lost Ark got a sequel, Star Wars got a sequel. There are a lot of movies around that time that got sequels, but E.T. did not get a sequel.
Well, speaking of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, trash. But
that was the second Raiders
was the second
movie,
one.
right?
But then the third movie, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, it definitely rebounded. And I would put Last Crusade on the same level as Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was that good. I feel like there's actually a lot of those trilogies that the second movie is really awful and the third movie is really good.
Right.
Like if you
except
look
Star Wars.
Except for Star Wars.
Yep.
Like if you look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Oh, let's look at that.
Let's look at that because I know you love your superhero movies.
Oh, I love them. They're all different.
Right. The first Captain America, very good. Captain America: The Winter Soldier, I didn't love it. But then Captain America: Civil War, it was spectacular.
That's because you're biased against winter.
That's
You're
true.
a seasonist.
I know. Like, we got snow on the ground right now, and it's the day after Thanksgiving, and I'm upset. And same thing with basically all of the original trilogies, if you just count them as 3 standalone movies and not part of, like, the larger MCU. First Iron Man, good. Second Iron Man...
Not so good.
Not so good. I never even finished it. And the third Iron Man, I never even tried to watch because I disliked the second Iron Man so much. So I feel like... There a lot of movies.
Mickey Rourke was in the second one as the the Whippet guy.
Yeah, but that's like post-surgery Mickey Rourke,
right?
Like face all mashed in Mickey Rourke.
Post The Wrestler, Mickey Rourke.
Right.
With The Wrestler was a fantastic movie.
Yeah,
that was a
totally
movie he was made to play.
Yeah,
that was his role.
So I understand. Like part of it is we have to get from A to B, and it's easy to write a beginning and an end, but the middle part on how to get.
Right.
Get there is hard. And so I realized that these trilogies kind of represent that. Like, you have to get from Thor 1 to Thor Ragnarok, and then, Thor, the Dark World.
Well, it's kind of like a movie itself, though. Like a movie, you have a beginning, middle, and end. And then usually the middle of a movie is like, what's going on here? You're losing me a little bit. And then all of a sudden there's conflict resolution near the end, and then there's the climax and the final act.
Right.
So usually that's the way it is. So maybe it's playing out a little bit with these trilogies. I would take issue with the Raiders of the Lost Ark in that those were meant to be serials. Like those were designed to be like the Saturday morning, rapid fun mixed dealios. And maybe the second one was vacuous, but you always knew that there was going to be at least 3 of those, right? I mean, so you knew that there was going to be some kind of variance in quality.
But then when they went back to the well with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which was also trash.
Oh, yeah.
It was really bad.
I saw them, but I don't remember them.
Yeah.
I remember the first
they were
one.
Clearly really good.
I remember Raiders of the Lost Ark like everybody does with the snakes and the melting Nazi guy and the scene at the end of hopeless abandonment with the warehouse.
Right.
There's just there are a lot of really good scenes and memorable scenes in there. But it's hard to do that again. Like that at the time was a very pioneering movie, right? It was like it was bringing back of those serials from Saturday mornings and dime store movies and stuff like that. So how are you going to recreate that? Same thing with Jaws. Like Jaws was a suspenseful movie that had not been made. The likes of it had not been made before, right? Like it was either a horror movie that was just traumatically Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or it was like a movie that was about a seaside quaint village. Like there was no kind of variation from what they did, what Steven Spielberg did in those days.
And then if you have something really good and then 20 years later you try to go back and recreate it and recapture that magic, it never happens. Like with The Godfather Part 3.
Right.
In 1990, 1991.
90, yep.
Yeah, it was just it's easy to crap all over The Godfather Part 3 and everybody does it. But that's because
But
it's trash.
There's a reason for that.
There's a reason for it.
Well, and I just thought Sofia Coppola ruined that movie for me. Andy Garcia was so spectacular. Like, he's good in everything. I love the way he chews on scenery, and you just never know when he's going to go off, even though that's his shtick of just not knowing when he's going to go off.
I wish there had been more with him, though.
Yes.
Yes.
It would have been a better movie with more of him in it.
Yeah, I wish that even though it was already almost a 3-hour-long movie, like, I think they could have developed his character even more.
Well, they pull back a little bit on the Sophia and put more Andy in there.
Right.
And I think that would have been a good filler.
Yeah, I felt bad for him a few times because he was having to play off her, and you could just see he was just, like, grasping at straws and just, like, throwing everything against the wall and trying to see what sticks. And
help me act here. Help me act.
Yeah, I felt really, really bad. But at the same time with The Godfather Part 3, like, it kind of suffered on its own because the storyline wasn't as compelling. Like,
right.
It was so convoluted with the Vatican Bank and with, like, the Pope being
it was hard to follow. Yeah.
And then I think at that point, like in the first two Godfather movies, Al Pacino and Diane Keaton weren't Al Pacino and Diane Keaton.
Right,
like, they were relative newcomers. But then by the time 1990 rolled around, they have their shtick down.
Yep.
And so even though they both still gave very good performances, I could still see, like, Diane Keaton in her, like, Annie Hall outfit,
right.
like, wandering around the set, you know, in Sicily or whatever. Like, it was just not good overall. And we're not being original whatsoever by crapping all over The Godfather Part 3, but it is what it is. Like, it's something you shouldn't... It's a blatant money grab.
Right.
And you shouldn't go back and taint the first two by just trying to recreate the magic 25 years later.
I think that Godfather 3 would have been a fine movie if it had been not Godfather 3.
Well, I read that apparently Mario Puzo and Francis Ford Coppola wanted to call it The Death of Michael Corleone, but the studio said, if you're making a movie about Michael Corleone, it's going to be called The Godfather Part 3.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you got to have that branding on there.
Yeah.
So maybe it would have gone in a different direction if they didn't have to... If they could have focused more on Michael Corleone, but then, I mean, it was a Michael Corleone movie, so I don't know how you can do it any differently, except maybe cut out a little, I don't know.
Well, maybe the studio had more sense than we give it credit for.
Yeah.
You don't include the name in the movie title to mislead people. Like, we were looking earlier at the research that the staff whipped up for us, and the sequel to The Fugitive, which was a fantastic movie starring Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones. Obviously, Harrison Ford is a doctor accused of murder that he didn't commit, and then being hunted down as he escapes. And the sequel to that was called U.S. Marshals, which it didn't have Fugitive 2 or anything like that in the title. It was just Harrison Ford's like, yeah, no, I'm good. And then Tommy Lee Jones is like, I'm going to be in this movie. And then it wasn't nearly as good, right?
Yeah.
So there's instances like that where sometimes it makes sense not to have the name in the title of the movie, the same name.
So would that be the case with Goon 2? Or
you got to capitalize on that franchise name.
What about Bone Cop, Bad Cop?
Oh, we already did an episode on that, so we shouldn't go back. That was one of our best-selling episodes, actually. We don't want to tie into that. But there's also Dumb and Dumberer.
Yeah.
When Harry met Lloyd.
That we didn't even need the first Dumb and Dumber.
Well, I liked the Dumb and Dumber first one.
Really?
Yeah, I liked the first one.
That came out when I was in college, and I remember being thoroughly unimpressed.
Well, it's just that movie was for people of a certain age and of a certain gender, I think. Like the toilet scene, for example, and also, but the funniest thing about that whole movie was, to me, where the guys have hot food, and somebody had spiked their hot food.
I don't remember any of that movie. So
okay, so I'm going to explain it to you.
Okay.
So, and there's that scene where they have hot food, and Jim Carrey is so overwhelmed with hot food that he squirts mustard, and the coolness of the mustard is enough to give him relief, even though mustard is a spicy thing. So there's a lot of depth in that one scene. And also Cam Neely's in that movie.
Oh, he is?
Yeah, he's Seabass.
See,
he's a villain in
we
that
can
movie.
bring it back to hockey.
Everything's all about the hockey.
Everything's all about
Goon.
Hockey. Yeah.
Cam Neely.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and Tyler
Sagan.
Yeah, was in Goon 2.
He was in Goon 2. There was a lot of hockey players who wanted to jump on that bandwagon.
Bone Cop, Bad Cop 1 was all about hockey.
Right.
Yeah.
All the movies that are successful in my heart have have hockey at their core. So what other movie should not get a sequel?
Oh, goodness. Well, we just spoke about it in our last episode, but I'm going to not answer the question that you asked. I would actually like to see Widows 2.
What? No, come on.
I would. I would not like to see Bohemian Rhapsody 2, though.
No.
Like the age years.
But what would we do with Widows 2?
I don't know.
Like then it becomes a little bit of a farce, doesn't it? It's like they're trying to do the same thing they did before, and they're just kind of,
I don't know.
They're a mere shell of their former selves.
It could be
like Ocean's 12.
It could be like one of those anthology series, like True Detective. Which sequel, the second season of True Detective, I did not watch because I heard such bad things about it.
Right, me too.
Even though I like Rachel McAdams and Colin Farrell, I was like, yeah, I can't watch this.
I heard it was terrible. I have not watched it. The first season, I actually watched a little bit of it again. I've seen the first season all the way through.
Right.
And I watched a couple of episodes again just because it was so great.
Mm-hmm. So maybe Widows 2 could be like an anthology where it's the same general setup, but just with different characters and different general circumstances.
No, I think what they should do is
you're done.
Widowers.
Oh, there we go. Like it could be like what we talked about in the episode, where Kevin James is like a stay-at-home dad, and then his breadwinner wife dies,
who happens to be like a mafia kingpin or something like that.
Right? Yeah, and then he's got to take over the and suddenly he's competent and
So it's Kevin James and Chris Rock and Chris Spade or
David
Spade. And what other lame second grade actors could we put in there?
I think those three are pretty good right now.
Yeah.
Oh, Adam Sandler.
Oh, and you know who could be like the villain? Chevy Chase.
Yes.
An older, like current day Chevy Chase. I think we got a movie here.
All right, awesome.
Hollywood should be paying more attention to this podcast.
I did read lately that Amazon is incredibly desperate for original content for its streaming service.
Really?
So, Amazon, call us. We have all the good ideas.
You know, Amazon should actually film us doing the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And then they would have content.
Maybe we would have more than like 6 downloads then.
More than just Sweden.
So what do you want to see? What sequel do you want to see or not want to see?
Do I want to see or not want to see?
Either one.
See, I didn't want to see Blade Runner sequel. But that was a really good movie. I really liked it.
Oh, okay. That's good.
Not nearly as good as the first one. It wasn't nearly as good as the first one, but that didn't need to be a sequel.
Right.
There was no need for that to be a sequel. The mystery was good. I was fine with the ambiguity. That was a money grab to me, but I don't know. It was still pretty good. What would I like to see? Let's see. I don't need any more superhero sequels. Thank you very much. I know this breaks your heart because I'm not a fan of the sequels.
We're going to Infinity War 2 next year.
I know.
I'm
because
sorry.
I love you, baby. That's why.
Oh, thanks.
But I don't need any more. I don't need any more about those guys. I know pretty much all I need. Spotlight 2. I don't need to see Spotlight 2. One of my favorite movies of all time.
You don't want to see another journalism team uncovering like corruption in the White House or something?
I do, but I don't want those same guys doing it. Like I don't want, as much as I love that cast, Mark Ruffalo and Liev Schreiber,
and Rachel McAdams.
There's a thread, and Rachel McAdams, Michael Keaton. Yeah. I don't need any of that stuff again from those guys. That was a good movie. I don't need Spotlight 2. I don't need All the President's Men 2. There are some movies that just we don't need sequels to. I know I'm dating myself by referring to those movies, but there's certain ones you just don't need.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Like Desperately Seeking Susan 2.
Like Sex and the City 2? Oh, wait a minute.
Oh. Yeah, okay, there we go. Oh. There we go. All right, you brought it up. You're digging your own grave here. So this week,
whoops,
Sarah Jessica Parker, who's been trying to get Sex and the City 3 made for at least a solid year, Chris Noth discussed on, I believe, a podcast.
What?
The script for Sex and the City 3. And all I have to say is nobody wants this movie made, Sarah Jessica Parker. Seriously. Like, the series was fine enough. It should have ended a couple seasons before it did, but it's not the first one to overstay its welcome, so I'm not gonna fault it for that. It ended the way it should have ended. The first movie, I actually didn't enjoy it. I liked the second movie better, which I understand I should not say because it was racist and incredibly problematic. But the first movie Carrie gets dumped at the altar. And it's just 2.5 hours of her whining and acting like an a-hole after she gets dumped at the altar.
Wow.
Whereas the second movie, they tried to lighten it up and have fun. And it was more about like the four ladies and they go on an adventure. So even though it was racist and problematic, at least it kind of got back to the spirit of the series. So I thought it was more enjoyable than the first one. But it was still awful, as was the first movie. And nobody wants a third one made, except for Sarah Jessica Parker. So stop. Stop Sarah Jessica Parker with Sex and the City. Nobody wants it anymore. Sell some of your clothing or something if you're that hard up for cash. Just leave it alone.
I don't like it when you get upset.
But I'm not upset at you.
Titanic 2. We don't need a Titanic 2.
No.
So I'm just looking at the top movies of all time. And the ones that don't have sequels.
Avatar.
They're making a sequel to.
Yeah, James Cameron is coming out and making like 2 or 3 more Avatar movies. Like, I don't really remember much of the first movie. So why do we need more of them? Okay,
so of the top 10 movies of all time, only Titanic has not been made into a sequel.
Wow.
So you've got Star Wars The Force Awakens, Avatar, Black Panther, there's another one coming out, Avengers Infinity War, Titanic, Jurassic World, Marvel's The Avengers, Star Wars The Last Jedi, Incredibles 2, and The Dark Knight. They are either sequels or have sequels made from them.
I would say The Dark Knight was better than the original.
Oh yeah,
what was?
But there was a reimagination.
Batman Returns, right? Or Batman Begins. That was the name of that. The first Christian Bale one.
Yeah.
Like Batman Begins was very, very good, but then The Dark Knight was like so freaking good.
Yeah.
It was crazy. Like I really enjoyed those.
So E.T. is number 19 on the all-time list, is the next one that does not have a sequel made from it or is not a sequel itself.
Wow.
And then we have to go, The Lion King, number 22.
Although it's getting a live-action remake.
Right. And it's been remade in plays and theaters across this vast land of ours. Wonder Woman, not a sequel, but I would argue that it is derivative and it's been represented in other movies. And then, Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle. Oh, that's a sequel.
That's a sequel, yeah.
Yes, Frozen, number 33 on the list. So as you can see, there's a trend here, and then you go all the way down the list. The Passion of the Christ, number 40.
Wow.
On the overall list. That was not a sequel, but it's part of the oldest story ever told, so theoretically it's an ongoing sequel. And then Deadpool and this Inside Out is another one on at number 45. Deadpool's having a sequel made. So you can see where I'm going with this.
Deadpool just had a sequel come out
recently.
Yeah, recently.
Yep.
So
yeah. So there's a lot of we go down to say here's another one we don't need a sequel to. Forrest Gump.
Oh right, yeah. Oof.
Very good movie. Award-winning. Box office boffo apparently. But I don't need to see what Forrest Gump's doing these days. Right. I'm surprised that somebody hasn't gone there. Forrest Gump, the early days.
Right. Like Little Forrest. Like
Forrest.
Right.
Run, Forrest, run!
I mean, if Young Sheldon can be a TV series, why can't Young Forrest be a TV series?
Right. And so there's any manner of these movies that have been made and are sequels but don't need to be made. So this is where originality is where is all the originality in Hollywood these days? And
this is what we touched on a little bit in our previous podcast when we talked about Widows. Normally movies that are marketed like for women, like starring women, they're just sequels or remakes of movies that were starring dudes that now just happen to be starring chicks instead. So everything's a sequel or it's a remake or a reboot, and why can't we have nice things?
Well, I think it's sad, but it's because of what I did, and I read the list, and they were all the best-selling movies of all time. It's because they're all movies and stories that people were familiar with. Yeah. And originality does not get rewarded. Mm-hmm. But at some point, you would think it would have. Like, these stories had to start somewhere as original stories. Mm. Like, Star Wars originally started, and yet the Marvel Universe did not start because it was already comic books, and people were already engaged and interested and knew some of the stories. So that wasn't really original in some ways. The presentation, the medium, was original, but the actual stories were not. Like, Iron Man was always a guy who had a bad heart, and had a suit of armor developed around him in order to live.
That's a metaphor.
Right.
That's a hardcore metaphor right there.
That is a hardcore metaphor.
Yeah.
Wow. Look at you with a hardcore metaphor. But I guess we're calling Hollywood on, let's try to make some original movies for a change.
Yeah, that would be great.
And Widows is one of them.
And if you need any ideas, please drop Coco and Dalts a DM, slide into our DMs, and we'll be willing to chat with you. And
send us an email at
cocoandalts@gmail.com.
And one day we will check that mailbox.
I don't even remember when the last time I checked that email was.
Don't tell people that.
Okay.
We check it every day.
We do.
And we take your suggestions to heart.
Probably best to slide into our DMs, though.
Right. Whatever that means. All right. So I know that this is going to sound a little bit, hypocritical, but this is episode 24. So therefore, we're talking about sequels in a sequel.
We're serialized, though.
Are we serial?
Yeah. We're episodic. So, I mean, does that really count?
But isn't that really a sequel?
No, because we're
one
not...
to the next?
No, not really. I mean, we've made a couple references to a previous podcast, but it's not like... So we talked about Widows in the last episode, and now we're going to talk about it some more because we thought more about, a new way that Viola Davis's character could go or whatever.
You've given this a great deal more thought than I have, clearly. I need to study up a little bit better.
Okay.
So on that note... For another episode of Coco and Dalts.
Another totally random episode of Coco and Dalts.
Totally random, and we love you, the listener, who gets to this point in the podcast.
At least it's short.
Yes. For another week, I'm still not Coco.
And I'm still not Dalts.